keep playing games with nature until Mother Earth really puts her foot down, along with the toll taken on human health. I encourage aligning with the many nature groups that Norwalk is blessed to have to work together in cooperative, healthy stewardship. Again, great thanks for proposing this pesticide ordinance on Norwalk City properties. Like the old adage, if you have your health, you have everything. Without the health of the earth, we truly have nothing. Thank you so much for the courage to do the right thing.
Thank you for speaking, Audrey. I wanted to just mention that Heidi Alterman, an additional common council member, has joined our meeting. So we can go to the next speaker if you'd like.
Okay, we have Priscilla Farrell. Priscilla, can you hear us?
I think Priscilla's muted. She's still muted, yeah.
Priscilla, can you unmute? Go ahead. I'm trying to prompt her to unmute, but I don't know if she's in front of her computer. Should I go to the next person?
Yep, go to the next
Can
person.
you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Great, thank you.
Okay, sorry for that.
No
I
worries.
wasn't here. I'm testifying as president of Friends of Animals, as a gardener, and as a Rowayton resident to urge you to vote in favor of the ordinance. And I think that the organic alternatives may be more expensive initially. It may take more effort initially to work through the transition, but that these considerations are going to be outweighed by knowing that the city is no longer posing a health risk to pollinators or to residents, uniquely vulnerable to pesticide exposure through grass, soil, and other surfaces. Dr. Sarah Evans is an assistant professor at Mount Sinai, and I heard her testify, and she talked about children being at risk for pesticide exposures at schools and parks, playing fields, playgrounds, and other public areas where these dangerous chemicals are routinely applied. And of course, the kids are particularly vulnerable to it. Knowing that the toxins put kids and pets and butterflies and bees and other pollinators and birds and wildlife in harm's way, I started a pesticide-free Rowayton effort in my community. And back in the summer of 2012, I noticed yellow pesticide application signs on the edge of Pinckney Park in Rowayton. That's situated, of course, along 5 Mile River. It's a habitat for marine life, including fish and birds. And it's also the site of loads of community events. So the families and the children are all sitting on the lawn. And that's also where dogs are walked. And one of the other horrible truths is that dogs internalize lawn chemicals from contaminated lawns, and they suffer increased rates of cancers along with humans. These traces of the chemicals are prevalent in households at least 2 weeks after the dog walks on those lawns. So I called the lawn care company and I asked what the substance was. And I learned that it's a contaminant for groundwater. It's called quinchloric. It was used because of crabgrass and weeds, and it really put 5 Mile River at risk from either a runoff of quinchloric from the lawn or from drift. And that toxin is bad for aquatic animals. So the marine life in 5 Mile River was in peril, so to speak, while this was going on for years. I then approached the 6 taxing districts commissioners. I explained the risks of exposure, and I asked them, you know, they were alarmed by the water pollution argument, and I asked them if they would make Pinckney Park an organic showpiece for the community in 2013, and they agreed to do that. They said, let's make it an organic pesticide-free lawn care program on all of the 6 properties we manage. So this has been done in Rowayton. It's fantastic to do this in Norwalk, but it's not pioneering. It's been done in one community of Norwalk for 9 years. Please know that of 30 commonly used lawn pesticides, 22 are toxic to birds, 14 toxic to mammals, 30 are toxic to fish, 29 are deadly to bees. And pesticides are one of two reasons why nearly 1/3 of the wild birds in North America have vanished since 1970. We strongly urge you as Norwalk leaders to support the ordinance to eliminate unnecessary application of pesticides on city property. And I think the result is going to better protect residents and others with an environmentally smart approach to property management. Thanks so much for considering it.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank
Are there
you.
other speakers?
Yeah, I have Diane Loricella.
Great. And then you, when people finish speaking, you can move them back to the participants rather than panelists.
Sure.
Thank you.
Diane,
Hi,
can you
Diane.
hear us?
Diane, oh, there you are. You're not
Yes,
muted.
hi, and you can hear me, I hope.
We can.
I don't know if you can see me, though.
We cannot.
Okay, all right, thank you. For the record, Diane Loricella. I wanted to echo, I'll save time by echoing what Audrey and Priscilla just said. I thank them for their work that they've done as volunteers as well. For those of you that are newer to the committee, I just wanted to say I'm a former Land Trust board member of over 12 years, no longer on the board, but a big supporter, and also as the founding president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association back in the 90s. And I know Louise had a role in giving her opinion here, and she does so much for the waterways and environment. I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree and ask that you all vote yes on the current proposed ordinance. I wanted to also state that I would love to see, and I think I heard that the intent was to have an educational component. I first of all, of course, echo what some others have said, that changes into new ways of doing things, sometimes by personnel in cities, towns, and the state, can be a little difficult. And I'm very hopeful, especially with the introduction of Mr. Robert Stowers, who is on this call. I see him. I think it's so important for the city personnel to understand why these changes are taking place and to reward them, incentivize them. Next, I hope that there will be an educational component, and I'm very happy to help with that, as I'm sure all of the groups that you've reached out to, Madam Chair, is the city is leading by example. And possibly some of the first places where an educational component would be best are areas that have private wells, drinking water wells, and people that live near waterways, ponds, and the sound. I do want to just offer a friendly, kind of like tale of warning. Many years ago, when there was the first incidence of West Nile virus, I formed with a group of women from throughout Fairfield County, especially Stamford, a group called SAFE, Seeking Alternatives for the Environment. The reason we formed is because the federal government was hell-bent on aerial spraying of resmethrin, which was toxic to bees, which was also going to hurt what few lobster and critters in the sound for runoff. The reason why we were able to get the state legislature to put together a special kind of like an emergency plan is because often when people are scared about something new, they will seek the fastest chemical that is available to try to reduce the potential health threat. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is that I know there is kind of a waiver, but still I'm so happy there is a process for city agent departments and others in the city that may want to spray these materials when it could be considered an emergency. So I do pray and I do feel that you all would be very well served to take a breath before we reach for, the chemicals, because the state almost committed a horror show on the environment because in New York State, they were aerial spraying and spraying at night out of trucks. You probably saw the copy. We were ready to do the same, but then some of the advocates were able to convince the state that it was not going to make much of a difference and that there were other ways to fight West Nile virus. So I thank you very much for your good thoughts on this and the amount of time. And I hope that we can also add additional chemicals as our scientific community and knowledge advances. And I do
Thank you,
believe
Diane.
with amendments, we can do so. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. Great. So there's another hand up, Louise Washer. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Diane.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of the North River Watershed Association to thank the Ordinance Committee for raising this issue and to voice our support for protecting drinking water, wildlife habitat, and especially our really important to Norwalk shellfish industry. So this is so important for protecting. We know from next door in Darien where there's a need to do dredging at Peachtree Beach, that core samples have found pesticide levels too high for the sediment to be stored in these open pits in the ocean where they had planned to store them. So we already have problems and we need to turn off the tap is what I would say. So I thank you and thank you for making Norwalk a leader on this.
Thank you, Louise. Are there other speakers on the pesticide ordinance?
I'm not seeing any.
I'm not either. So the next public hearing we have is on the firefighter safety
Sorry,
building.
I just saw a hand go up.
Oops, Dan. Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Dan. You're still muted. Oh, there you go.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Oh, excellent. I don't have much to say other than just that I'm, very grateful I agree with everything that's been said. I just wanted to voice my strong support. I'm just a Norwalk resident and I didn't get everyone's name, but all the women who just spoke, thank you. And I feel very proud to be a Norwalk resident. And so I hope that please make us proud. Thank you.
Great. All right. So are there any other people here to speak on the pesticide ordinance? Seeing no hands raised, I will close the hearing on the pesticide ordinance and open the hearing on the firefighter safety building marking system sign ordinance. Is anyone here to speak on that? I'm not seeing any hands raised for that, so I'll close the hearing on the firefighter safety building ordinance and then open the discussion on the pesticides ordinance. And what we were proposing today was to listen to the public hearing in the pesticides ordinance, have a discussion if there's any other changes that the committee members want to make, and then I would then listen for a motion to move it to council. I see that Nora has her hand up.
Just very briefly, I wanted to thank our city staff for their work, not only on this ordinance, but in the years leading up to this ordinance to develop effective methods without pesticides. I think that it's important to emphasize that this is not something that is being imposed on an unwilling city staff, but rather us working in concert with the city staff that has been working very hard to find effective ways to move away from pesticides over the last couple of years. And I really want to applaud the parks, public works, everyone who's really put time and effort into this already. And I think that's worth emphasizing here because it is something that we are very grateful for the hard work on.
Oh, thank you for making that point, Nora. I think that's a fantastic point to make. Mr. Hooverman? So you have a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just really echoing what my colleague, Councilperson Najelski-Eichner just said, that the staff has been very open to making these changes. And I think that says something for the quality of staff that we have right now and the direction they see, that same direction that we are trying to move towards. I think this is a great first step, but I think we have to remember it is a first step on a journey that we have to continue on with other things that we need to look at for our environment that affect our water supply. It's very important. Water is going to be the most important thing in the next 50, 75 years. And I think it's important that we're taking steps to protect that for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hooverman. Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, I can say all that too, and credit your leadership, Ms. Shanahan, for this. But I also have some nits, which I want to give. They're not going to affect the fact of the public hearing. They're just, as I said, really nits, but I wanted to get it right before we get it to council, which I presume we're going to do. So let me just go through them, about 5 of them. I said in advance, they're nits, but so page 2, definition of organic land management, second line. I believe the comma should come out after management. Turf, grass, and landscape management and care of trees, if anybody disagrees.
Yes.
Moving on to page 4. This is to make this consistent. The first line says the Director of Recreation and Parks and Director of Public Works. I think to be consistent, it should be the Director of Recreation Parks and the Chief of Operations, comma, or the respective designees, comma. And that's consistent with the way we've talked about it before in paragraph, well, in the definition of the committee, the IPMP. So
So
again,
Darren, what we would write for that would be or his, her, or their designees, right, Thomas? And then how
well,
we
I
do-
just said or their respective, yeah, we can do that. I mean, up ahead, I mean, in the other section, we just said or their respective designees. So
Oh,
just-
yeah, let's say their respective designees, yeah.
So again, it would be Director of Recreation Parks and delete Director of Public Works and put in Chief of Operations, comma, or their respective designees, comma.
Right.
And then, okay, and then
Yeah.
moving down to A7, take the comma after the word and out.
Yes.
And then on C, the same thing on C, the Director of Recreation and Parks, and again, it should be and Chief of Operations, comma, or the respective designees, comma. And then last but not least, 8B, it says the written report required in this chapter. There are actually 2 reports required in this chapter, so I make it written reports, plural. And that's it.
Great,
Now-
thank you. So when
I
we
propose
come to a
those-
vote, I will say our proposed pesticide ordinance as amended by this discussion. Great. So Dominique, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair Shanahan. And on a procedural, like a logistic note, I appreciate our adoption of gender neutral language or inclusive language, in this as we move forward. I think that's fabulous. So 2 things. I'm really proud of what we've done. And I know when I joined the council in 2020, one of the first things you and I actually, Tom, talked about was whether or not we use pesticides on our public property in our schools. And that when I found that we had a more progressive department that was already thinking about this, it was really to quote one of our public commenters, I'm really proud of Norwalk. And so I'm really grateful that as my colleagues have said, we have such a wonderful recreation parks and operations is on board with this. So thank you all on that team. Lastly, the organic land management plan, I think, is really important. And I think for transparency with with the public, I think that's a really great thing that's in here, because I know we've had a lot of some issues around like the state of some of the fields and how that, potentially we just want people to know that one of the reasons why we're in transition is because we're trying to move off of these very harmful chemicals, right? And so that transparency of the public knowing that, I think, is very, very important. And so having that in there is really crucial. And lastly, I think that it's really important. We're doing this because we have to do it ourselves to set as a city. We can't expect private homeowners to adopt this if we're not willing to do it ourselves. So I'm really grateful that we're being really proactive about that and that we inspire homeowners. And on a personal note, transitioning off of Roundup's hard. It's a lot of extra work. And so, weeding, but it's good for Zen. And so in that way, we can be an example, and do the work ourselves so that we're not asking people to do things that we're not doing ourselves. I think that's really important. So I want to thank everybody, and I'm really happy to support this.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Goldstein.
I just want to, instead of just, I echo what everyone else has said. I'm not going to repeat it for everyone's sake, but I do want to note, and I know this has come up before in meetings, that one of the really valuable things I think that we want to take out of this experience is an effort to educate homeowners and to educate people who own private land on how best to maintain their land, to do so in a way that does not harm our environment and kids and our community. I think that effort to do that sort of public communication thing obviously isn't encapsulated in this ordinance, but I think it's part and parcel with the mission, and that's something that I hope happens, because I think it's really important for the health and safety of Norwalk. And so I will be proud to vote for this, and look forward to working with all of you in promoting good land management and care.
Thank you for making that point, Mr. Goldstein. Nora, do you have another comment? And then we'll go to Mr. Keegan. I figured that you must have a drafting comment if you've got your hand raised the second time.
I do, but I think Mr. Keegan was ahead of me.
Well, if you have a drafting comment, let's make that now, and then we'll let Tom.
Oh, sure. Mine is super minor. I am 1,000% in support of the environment, or of the gender neutral, but I wonder if we could just say there, if we could let go of the his, her, and their. I feel like that is holding on to a old-fashioned gender point about there not being a singular gender neutral pronoun, as opposed to just accepting that there is a useful gender neutral singular pronoun. It's a very minor point.
It's a very minor point. I'm okay with it if everybody else is, and we can make that a universal change for when we take it to council. Is that good with everybody? We'll vote on the amendment, and then we'll vote on that. Okay, great. Thank you for making that point. All right, Mr. Keegan, last but not least.
Well, Chair, if I could, sorry to do that, Tom, jump in. Just on that point about the gender neutral language, is that all right if I address that, or shall I? Okay. Yeah. I just want to be sure that that's consistent with the definition of gender in the code. I assume it is, if we just move to singular they completely. So
why don't we vote on it the way that it is? If we have to take it to council, we can make that small change.
Very good. That sounds good.
That way we'll just make sure that it's clean. Okay, so we lost Mr. Keegan's.
I think it's a great change. So good.
Yeah, we'll leave it the way that it is for the vote with Tom's changes, and then we'll maybe make a small change. Mr. Keegan.
Yeah. Are we sure?
I don't know, but we can't. We're not going to be able to.
I have no question. I also have a statement. I got knocked off the meeting briefly, but when I came back, I heard my colleague Nora Najolski-Eichner talking about the real heroes in this, and echoed by David and all of us. I think the real heroes are the staff and how they were willing to embrace this initiative. Kudos to them for doing that. Mr. Stowers, your staff as well, Kenny Hughes. But one of the things I will remind my colleagues, and I'm leaving, we know that, but I'll be watching from afar. This may have some financial implications in the future. And I just want all of you to remember that staff and the steps they took if they, in the future, have to ask for more funding, because, that may happen. That may be an unintended consequence. I am going to vote for this, okay? Absolutely, I'm going to vote for it because it's a good thing. I just wanted to remind everybody that there may be some financial implications in that. You take that into consideration if it does come down the pike, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Ms. Alterman, you have a comment before we take it to a vote.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not a member of this committee. I was just excited to, I guess, be present for the vote. I just wanted to make a comment in case anyone else is listening. I think it's great. And I was not aware of how many years the city has been doing that, like already moved to the organic route. But I did want to say for anybody with reservations about it, they do still have the one option for like extreme cases of poison ivy to use a chemical if needed. While I'm sure eventually that will also go to organic, I do think that might provide some comfort to people that are nervous about anything like that. So thank you. You guys are doing amazing.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Alterman. Great. So what I'd like to do is entertain, oops, Mr. Livingston.
I mean, I'm pulling up the Word version of this as we speak. We can make the changes, the his, her, their designee if we want to now. I could just tell you what they are. Or do you want to?
I mean, do you want to, I guess so, yeah. Do we feel like we have to go back to the gender, the definition of gender in the code in order to verify that we're doing this the right way? That was like the thing I didn't want to take the time to do.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, but I'm looking at this. So we actually do it two different ways in this ordinance. We use or their respective designees, which I just used, but we also in one place use the director, record parks or his, her, or their designee.
Let's, for the purpose of this, for voting it over to council, let's go with or their respective designees. And then if we have to make an adjustment on the floor.
We'll make that globally then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, make that globally.
Okay.
Let's just do it.
All right.
So what I'd like to do is entertain a motion to send the pesticide ordinance as amended by Mr. Livingston's comments. Oh, you know what, Mr. Keegan, because this is the last time that I get to interact with you based in my committee, and I'm going to miss you so much. I have to say that now because I am going to have to leave this meeting after we take this vote for a family outing, but it's been a pleasure to have you on this committee.
Thank you.
I'd like you to have the motion to send this to council, but just I'm going to take 1 minute before we all vote on that to say that it's just been such a pleasure working with you, and you've been such a strong member of this committee, and your insight and ideas, especially on enforcement, which has been, I always go to you with all of the enforcement questions. I'm going to really miss that. And I may just have to make a phone call down to Florida from time to time to get your ideas. I hope that the citizens of Norwalk think that's a-okay, because I bet they will. Anyway,
if I'm not on the beach, I'll answer the phone.
Okay. So Mr. Keegan has made a motion that we
I
move
have.
the
Thank you.
pesticides ordinance to Common Council with the amendments that Mr. Livingston and Nora Jelski-Eitner have made. All in favor? It is a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. With that, it is my daughter's birthday. We're having a little party. So Mr. Livingston has kindly offered to take over from here. So thank you very much. And Mr. Keegan, I'll be missing you on this committee, missing seeing your face in this Hollywood Square. Good night, everybody.
Happy birthday.
Good night.
Darren,
Happy birthday.
Darren, I'll follow up with the changes to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item is to discuss and vote on the firefighter safety building marking system sign ordinance. There were no comments. Does anybody on the committee have any comments or they want to make on this? Seeing and hearing none, I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Keegan, let's all you tonight. You're moving it to council, next council meeting? Okay, Mr. Keegan has made a motion to move that to the next council meeting. All in favor, indicate by raising your hand. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, now we're going to move on to public comment. Is there anyone on the line who wants to make a public comment on any of the other items on the agenda? I'm guessing not, but I have to ask the question.
I have Diane Loricella.
Okay, Ms. Loricella. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman Substitute. Diane Loricella. I was quite interested in reading the agenda. I noted that there were some changes being proposed or for discussion later on about the Aquifer Agency. Many years ago, I think it was under several mayors ago, this came up with the state of Connecticut, and Norwalk kind of had to be nudged into declaring an entity to become an aquifer agency. What brought me to Norwalk was I was hired as a student intern. So I'm dating myself to help find the polluter of the Norwalk First Taxing District well field off of Broad Street and Perry Avenue for a different chemical compound than what we're concerned about today. And so I have working knowledge of what an aquifer protection strategy can be, especially with private homeowners, but also with public size, large well fields. I think, of course, your current charge seemed to be, when I read the text, was that you were just modernizing the language, adding planning and zoning commissioners after our merger of the two commissions. I just wanted to have put a pin in it for the future. I will be speaking with the chair and some of you who I know care about this issue. Many years ago, I proposed to the city that we consider that we never place the Aquifer Agency under at the time, the zoning commission. Why, you may say? Because they have so much else that they are in charge of. I felt it was better to place it under Conservation Commission. Now, I lost that discussion, but I think today is a new day and there is a lot more information and knowledge about how climate change is affecting things. The Planning and Zoning Commission now has even more work to do. They're the coastal area management. They have a lot of other responsibilities. So I'm going to make a pitch again in the future, not for tonight, that this ordinance committee just consider moving the Aquifer Agency to a different entity, possibly the Conservation Commission. So thank you for letting me speak, and I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, Ms. Loricella. Now, are there anybody else? Is there anybody else asking to speak?
I'm not seeing any. And Broderick Sawyer has his hand
Oh,
up.
Broderick, do you want to speak? We've already approved the sending your sign ordinance to the council. Do you have something you want to say? Broderick, you're on mute.
I'm prompting him to unmute, but it could have been accidental as well.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no one else, we can close the public comment period. Is Broderick speaking about I assume, the other item? All right, we'll move on to acceptance of the minutes from May 17th, 2022. Do I have a motion? Mr. Keegan, you want to move that? Okay, any changes, additions, comments?
Yeah,
Mr.
I got
Gold-
a couple.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, let me get to the page. I just want to move to on the cannabis sections. This is page 4 of the minutes. I just want to note just one thing here. You'll see where it says Mr. Goldstein explained that the city can have up to 3 retail dispensing facilities. At that time, that is correct. The law has since changed on this issue due to an amendment to the state law that happened at the end of session. They've eliminated the 1 per 25,000 person requirement. I'm not sure you need to amend the minutes to reflect that because it was accurate at the time I said it, but just wanted people to know. Okay. Also, on page 6, I want to note where it's the 4th paragraph down. Ms. Ayers asked if any of the funds will be used for the administration. And then it says, Mr. Goldstein explained that they are required to put money in the trust account. It's that they are not required to put money in a trust account.
Okay, insert the word
and also
not.
And change it to word not. And also we're going to talk about this a little later, but it's not going to actually be a trust account. There's a verbiage change that we'll make.
Right. Okay,
but I'm sorry.
Inserting the word not before required, right?
Yeah, we definitely need the word not there.
Okay. Are there any other?
That's all I got.
Any other comments or changes? Seeing none, I'll call for vote on the minutes as amended. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay. So next item of business is the discuss and vote on the cannabis ordinance. Mr. Goldstein, you want to take us through this?
Absolutely. So I kind of want to, let's preface this. I know that we were initially thinking about taking this to public hearing tonight. I'm going to advocate, along with Tom and Lisa, who I know stepped off the call, that we're not quite ready for that moment yet. There are some drafting concerns I know that have been brought to my attention. There's some I have on my own. But I kind of wanted to go through a couple changes that have been made. They're not as much substantive, but I do want to kind of walk through this. And I know, Tom Levison, I know there's some sort of internal consistency issues that we need to work out. I want to, though, bring people's attention to section 1.3. I know that we're going to talk about where it says the temporary prohibition is hereby revoked as of the date of the enactment of this chapter and the adoption of corresponding zoning regulations. We're probably going to need to stick something in there about whichever is later. I also want to note in 1.4, I want to talk a little bit about this. This is the designation space issue. Just to preface this, because we've spent a lot of time talking about this. This is a requirement that is unlike any other requirement from the state that we've seen in terms of use of a substance. There is no designated spot where you can drink alcohol. There's no designated spot where you can smoke a cigarette in the same way. We've had pretty extensive discussions about what to do. There are very few requirements from the state as to what it needs to be other than quite literally a place, quote unquote. And we also have had a number of discussions with public safety officials and the mayor and his team. Long story short, we have now what you can see in 1.4C, which says that per CGS, so the Connecticut General Statute 7148, the mayor shall designate a place and or places as the only public location wherein public consumption of cannabis is permitted through smoking, vaping, or the consumption of edibles. Very simply, why this is structured this way is both to deal with the fact that there does need to be a designated place under the law, A. B, we wanted to give some flexibility in case we choose a place and for some reason, either something's not working or we find that there may be a better way to deal with this. We want the ability to have some level of discretion and from a public safety and health perspective, so that to make a change of time is of the essence. If we put a specific place in the ordinance, the concern is that it would take several months to amend an ordinance. And if there's an issue, especially if it's a public safety issue that arises, we want a little more discretion in terms of how that gets handled. So that's 1.4. 1.5, I just want to note section B. Section A has not changed in terms of person, in terms of the amount that's fined. Section B, the reason the fine amount has changed from 1,000 to 250 is for enforcement purposes. And it basically, if it's higher than 250, there's a hearing officer requirement that can be quite onerous for the city and can provide a significant delay. We were advised by council to change the potential penalty to $250 instead. The last thing I really want to note here, we're not going to be, in the previous draft, it was referred to as the Nora Cannabis Trust Account. Tom Livingston absolutely was right here. This isn't actually going to be an actual trust instrument. What it really is an account. It's a separate account by which the funds will be deposited, tracked, and maintained, and expenditures will be accounted and logged, so on and so forth. So it's where we remove the word trust. It's not a substantive change in terms of how we have portrayed and described this. That has not changed. Just the word trust has been eliminated. And the only other thing I can think that I just wanted to note in section 1.8 is we did put in a part about how the guidelines that we discussed at our last meeting that Lamont Daniels and the community services team are working on, that there's an oversight and review period that'll happen once every 24 months, at least once every 24 months. that there's some common council oversight on the guidelines. That is a new change. Obviously, this is a work in progress, and I've been very grateful to many of you and Brian Candela and Council and Darren for all of your help on this. And I'm open to any suggested changes you have and any questions you have on sort of sequencing, timing, so on and so forth.
Thank you.
That was pretty quick.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I thank you for all your work on this. So open up for discussion on this. Mr. Hulman?
Thank you, Substitute Chair Livingston. Let's go. I want to dive right into, what is it, 1.4, cannabis consumption restrictions, and this idea of the mayor leaving this to the mayor to make a decision on what the place is that can happen. I'm confused as to why, in all the reading that I've done on this, Josh, I have to ask the question, why can't we follow the same ordinances about smoking, the public health safety ordinance 7148H, and 748H. I think those are the two that I found that are the smoking.
Yeah, they deal with municipal authority. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm wrong. That's municipal authority. I'm talking about 19342, where smoking is prohibited, and 19342A, which is vaping. Why we don't follow that, so that we're not trying to find a specific place, but we're saying where a prohibition is. So within 25 feet of a doorway, within all of these things and we can't smoke in municipal buildings. We can't smoke on municipal property, all of those things. Why don't we follow that, as opposed to the mayor putting this into the executive branch's purview to make a decision and determine a place?
Okay, it's good, because the answer is because this is a different situation. And the reason this is a different situation, David, is because unlike the cigarette laws, the law here for cannabis has an explicit, undeniable requirement that the municipality is required to designate a spot where public consumption of cannabis is permitted. And the language in 7148 that's referred to here is explicit. We've reviewed this with council. We have to choose a place and or places. That is not true for cigarettes.
Why can't the place what I'm not understanding is why the place can't be the city with the prohibitions that follow the ordinances governing the consumption of tobacco products outside. The place being the municipality.
The place being the city, yeah.
The place being the city, with the provision that there are certain places that it is prohibited, as opposed to we have to pick one location, because I think you're going to destroy that one location. Is going to become this place to go to. Does it need to be that one place that becomes stigmatized with this idea?
Yeah, the answer is,
and that's the problem that I'm having is
no,
because
I hear you.
The mayor is going to have to make a distinction. And the other thing that we're doing as the legislative body is we're just saying, okay, executive, you deal with it. You pick a place. And that I have a problem with as well too, because I think that we're pushing off a responsibility here. And so I look at it as, can the place not be the city of Norwalk with these other prohibitions? Doesn't that fulfill the spirit and letter of that law?
So the answer to your question is yes. If you wrote the law that way and said that the designated place is the city of Norwalk, absent places that are specifically prohibited by this ordinance and or the identity zoning regulations, yes, that would satisfy the spirit of the law. However, I do not think that policy at the moment is something that, first of all, I'm not sure that's something that's viable. I'm not sure that that's something that will be a successful policy. There are a number of both public health, public safety, and enforcement reasons why that may be the case. And we are also trying to sort of get a handle on how other municipalities are handling this and trying to figure out from a best practices standpoint, how best to do that. the reason that you're looking at the mayor as sort of the political figure as the mayor, but what the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city. And the reason that it's designed the way it's designed, David, is because if we feel as a city that it should be as you've proposed, the mayor would have the discretion under this ordinance to make that so. If the mayor, if the city feels that it really does need to be a site and there need to be additional restrictions and enforcement and supervising from health officials, that's something we can do too. And this legal language doesn't prohibit us from doing any of that. In fact, what it does is it gives us a level of flexibility. I can understand why it may feel like we're passing the buck, but the truth of the matter is, in order to ensure discretion and an ability to be flexible, especially in something like this, which doesn't exist for any other substance that we're really talking about, I do think that this path does give us a level of flexibility and gives us the ability to make decisions in a quicker timeline than, say, if we were to say, well, we pick X park or X place, and we decide that X place isn't working, and now we need to go through months to figure it out.
Josh, I have to say, you're stigmatizing cannabis by limiting it, saying it's one location. Then we should do that to cigarettes too. Then we should do that to other things. I believe that what you're doing is creating it in a stigmatized way.
Well, David,
If you do not say that we have the city as a whole.
I'm not sure.
Josh, let me interrupt for a second, because Josh is not stigmatizing. The legislature stigmatized it by saying we had to designate a space. We did discuss.
That's what I feel that it's doing. With that by.
But it's not Josh. It's not Josh.
I know it's not Josh. I understand that it's not Josh. What I'm saying is that I think that the way that utilizing the city as a whole and then incorporating those prohibitions the way we do with tobacco does that. It encompasses the letter of the law and the spirit of the law at that point. That's my feeling on it. And I have a tough time with this section and putting it on the mayor. That's my thought.
Okay. Dominique.
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. Chair Livingston, temporary chair. Okay.
Whatever.
Whatever. All right. My thoughts are focusing in definitions under equity and equitable. First of all, I'm wondering, just for my first question, where we decided to pull the language about how to define those two. Is that from statute?
That's from statute. That's from the state statute.
Okay.
The enabling statute here. We have not. We have, with the exception of, I'm pretty sure, Connecticut general statute, and I think. Nope, it's not even in here anymore. I'm pretty sure that's the only definition that is not pulled directly from the cannabis statute.
Okay, so it's not pulled from. Okay, so then my question, thank you for that clarification. So my question is, I think my wish for us is to think about equity in terms of the specific issue at hand being cannabis and its legalization because of the effects of, the disproportionality in drug arrests for cannabis leading up to this moment. But also we have definitions of discrimination that are, I think, very more up to date than this in our code. And I'm wondering if we can use those as well. If the purpose is to list a bunch of protected classes, or if what we're trying to do here with equity and equitable is to really highlight that we want to be sure that in particular Black and Brown residents in Norwalk will be treated just as everyone else, even though that's not what's happened with cannabis up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll say, I'm just so I'm very clear and so we're on the same page. The definition from equity is from the state statute. Okay. That is not a definition that I or anyone in the city has altered.
Okay.
That's deliberate. But I hear, and I don't think that we did these definitions to create protected classes. I would disagree with that characterization.
Okay.
However, I think that the big theme of what you're going towards, and that there is a, and it's a clear underlying purpose of the state statute, and it's a clear underlying purpose of this ordinance, which is to and one of the reasons that we're building, that this fund is in existence is to try and promote programs and resources that try and remedy a lot of the issues that came to light as a result of the war on drugs. So we're on the same page, I think, thematically and goal-wise. I just wanted to make sure that was very clear about the definition in the ordinance itself.
Okay. And then to follow, so, the data that I've looked at, just doing a bit of this with alcohol and drug use, so knowing some of the public health research that carries over. So we're trying to remedy past injustice, and I get that. For me, in the code, then, is it worthwhile to expand, because this is a rather limited, when we're listing disparities of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, but there are a bunch of different groups that aren't included there. But really what we're talking about is, in particular, race and ethnicity, because of that, we know that, from drug arrests, we know that African Americans are disproportionately arrested for cannabis possession, right? So, and we also know that when cannabis becomes legalized recreationally, certain groups of people actually use it more. So there may be more people, particularly Latino folks, that may use more and may be more at risk of making, unfortunately, maybe just because of this being a new law. Back to David's point, like, how do we know that people are going to know what's safe and where it's safe, so that they don't get caught up in an inadvertent violation of this, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be a big public communication effort. That is something that I know I've had some interesting conversations with people about what to do about things like increased signage and public information, informing them, because there are going to be places where you can't do this and places, where you can. Well, we're going to have to adequately communicate that.
Right, but my concern is I don't want us to say, well, we're going to have to do it, and then we don't, because I don't think that's right. And I think that the signs should be multilingual, especially English, Spanish. And I think that, this gets back to the point, if we're going to designate because we have to, I think we should bake in as much as possible to make sure that we don't create unintended consequences with this law, so that in the application of the law and in the enforcement of the law, we have disproportionality, right? Because that's what we're trying to amend. That's what we're trying to remedy here, is some kind of inadvertent or otherwise disproportionality of enforcement, right? And so back to my question about, if we can, and I think we can, maybe we consider expanding the definition of equity or discrimination, because we've been a very future forward council in that way in the past few years to try to be inclusive.
I'm always happy to work with you on doing that. I have zero problem with that.
Can I interrupt for a second? So Josh, where is the defined term used? And we have a definition, but where's it used?
Yeah, you mean used in the context of the ordinance?
Right.
That is a great question. I'm virtually certain.
In definitions is where I saw it, Tom.
Well,
in definition is where it is.
Equity and equitable.
Yeah, but that doesn't count really.
Right.
It was used in the purpose before.
Right. We may need to revise this area.
Right. So as of now, this is a definition in search of a use.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't.
Should it be used in 16A? I recognize that 16A is limited to the purposes that are allowed under statute, but it's clearly relevant there.
I guess I'm struggling with the state statute encompasses the concepts, Dominic, that you're raising very strongly. Yeah. And I'm curious as how that translates down into our ordinance, which is putting it into effect. I mean, and I don't know what that means. I mean, what does that mean?
So I think there's a dual thing here. A lot of the thrust for the use of the word equity and the values and the values that come with it. We're in creating the Social Equity Council, which is primarily in a position of power when it comes to granting state licenses to what they call, what are called social equity applicants. I think that what, as Tom Livingston said, we're trying to do is find a way to show both in our language and in what we do that we are putting this into practice. And that, of course, shows up, as Nora said, most eloquently and frankly, both on a policy level too, in terms of the administration of the Norwalk Cannabis account and what the funds that we hope to receive through the municipal sales tax, basically what we're going to use the money for. So I think that to the extent that we could use the word and flesh that out, I think that's an absolutely worthwhile suggestion, and I'm happy to work with you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that, yes, there's two prongs to this. There's equity through like restorative practice, giving, funding to those things that we've described in the ordinance. And then there's the equity piece in the enforcement, right? Because to Tom's point, that's exactly, he said it very succinctly. Leave it to Tom and leave it to me to make it like 4 sentences, but it's this idea of how do we put this into practice to make sure we're not inadvertently creating ill-intended, unexpected effects, like unintended effects, because that's what's concerning me right now. Right?
I also will note, Dominique, and Tom Keegan can help me with an assist here. We had a conversation with the chief of police very early on about this issue, especially when it comes to law enforcement and about disparate enforcement and best practices. I know that the chief had reached out to several police chiefs in Massachusetts, where this has been legal for quite some time, about best practices. I know that we've had some additional conversations. I think Tom Keegan's had some more than I have. So if he's got anything to kick in, I will defer to my soon departing friend.
Well, thank you, Josh. When we're talking about the issue with how this is working in Massachusetts, because those were the places they've indicated that their biggest problem has been with DUI and not necessarily simply smoking. From a law enforcement perspective, my own, I try to make things pretty simple. We did have a lot of trouble with trying to come up with a place where we thought we could have the smoking of cannabis be, quote unquote, legal. We mentioned, I don't know, scores of places, including islands out in Long Island Sound. I mean, it almost became, all sorts of different places.
Area
what it
51.
came down to is really every single place that was recommended it be the place designated by the city where it's permitted. Somebody had a problem with it. So it was almost like we couldn't come up with one place that everybody agreed, that's the right place. But the bottom line is this: when it comes to the smoking of cannabis, okay, and David, I have to disagree with you a little bit on this. I think that the smoking of cannabis is not like someone smoking a cigarette. Smoking cigarettes has been for years and years and years legal. Okay. Maybe I even smoked 13 years ago and I was a good smoker. Trust me, I was good at it. Today, it's frowned upon because of the health issues, but it's still legal. And cannabis has been illegal since the beginning of time. Okay. Reefer madness. And we grew up at a time when it was against the law. I arrested people for possessing marijuana. I arrested people for smoking pot. I don't think that that's going to really happen much anymore. I think it's a societal thing. I think society is kind of turned a corner on it. But what will happen is the police will be given the option. If somebody is smoking cannabis in public, they can, or they don't have to, they can issue them a summons. If they are smoking pot where we designate it's legal, they can't, because it's legal there. So, we can make this as complicated as we want, but the real issue is The law says, as Josh indicated, we have to come up with a place. That's what the state has said. Come up with a place that where the smoking of cannabis is legal. Now, do we think people are going to flock there? I tend to doubt it, but at least we've satisfied the statute. That's where you can go if you choose to. But always remember, if you choose to walk down the street smoking, you can get a ticket. You know, and that's pretty much it, right, Josh?
Yeah, you said it about as well as anyone can. And I think Tom's, what Tom said, David, I agree with what Tom said in terms of both what the state statute said, and also we're trying to build this as an industry here in the city. We're actually trying to do the opposite of stigmatize it. So I got to say, I starkly disagree with your claim. I know I saw Nora's and Dominique's hands were up, and David's.
Yeah, Nora, you're next.
Yeah, and this is a difficult issue, and I recognize, David, very much your point, right? And I think that on the one hand, the goal of legalizing cannabis is to decrease arrests and related to it. You know, we certainly don't want to create a cottage industry of violations or tickets. You know, however, the difference, and I actually have a different perspective than Tom on tongue peeking on this one. The difference between cigarettes and cannabis is that cigarettes, while they are a health risk if you are getting secondhand smoke. So I would personally prefer, for instance, that cigarettes were entirely banned on our sidewalks as well, right? I would be very happy if this applied to cigarettes as well. But cigarettes, while they pose a health risk for long-term exposure to secondhand smoke, are not intoxicants when you are, you know, walking by getting the secondhand smoke. Cannabis is different. There is by definition, or, you know, the nature of the plant being what it is, I do not want my child walking on a sidewalk behind someone who is smoking cannabis. That is not a stigmatization, or that is not because I therefore wish them to be arrested. But I do think there is a material chemical difference between ingesting secondhand cigarette smoke and ingesting secondhand cannabis smoke. So I don't think that it is irrational as a policy matter to say that we should not necessarily be permitting this on our sidewalks where we have children walking. I don't, therefore, so I really do understand the point that you're making. I do understand the concern, but I do also think that this is potentially a different substance that does need some different treatment. So, you know, I recognize the equity concerns in those directions, but I do also think we need to be looking out for the potential consequences for our children, because we don't want to be discouraging people from using public sidewalks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Nora, I think you actually hit on one of the things we talked about when we were looking at locations, because David, I had started out a reaction same as yours, is why not make it legal everywhere? The idea of being dispersed. But I think politically, I don't think people are ready for it to be everywhere and on sidewalks and every place. And I think we do need to do what the state wants us to do, as ridiculous as it may be. Anyway, Dave, you had your hand up.
Well, I just want to, I'm concerned about this from an enforcement standpoint. To my friend, Mr. Keegan, I'm concerned about this from the equity standpoint. To my friend, Ms. Johnson, you need to then have multiple locations throughout this city, because you cannot, you're going to have people in communities of our city who don't have the ability to go travel to the other side of town, where that's where they can go have fun with some cannabis. So they're going to want to be on the sidewalk in front of their area, and now they're susceptible to fines and violation. And so if we're going to be equitable, we need to find multiple locations to serve the communities that we have as constituency. And that's a problem that I see with this one location shall decide. Now, I agree that the language that the state legislators came up with is cumbersome and troubling. But I also think that there are ways to look at it that we need to think a little outside of that particular box, because it's concerning to me that we are potentially creating an inequitable situation because of picking a specific location within the community.
David,
Right, David, that's
yeah.
exactly,
Well, you're going to say the same thing, Josh. That's why it says place or places.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's already in there.
Yeah.
For that reason, by the way.
Dominique?
Thanks, Tom. I want to thank the other Tom for always for the insight on enforcement. You know, and I think for me, what it's coming from too is I know you've extensively talked to law enforcement about this locally, and Chief Colick and others. And in my experience, like in this type of work, if we're not clear, then those folks that have to enforce the law are left to have to do the work we should have done at the beginning, right? So that's kind of where my concern is coming from. Like, I don't want them to have to guess. Like, I want to be able to provide them a guide that they deserve so that they're not having to do this guesswork with lots of discretion, that they should not have to actually make those type of broad decisions, right? So I thank you for that insight. For me, the other piece of this that hasn't come up yet is most people are aware probably that you don't just smoke cannabis, you can eat it, you can bake with it, you can do all sorts, you can distill it, you can vape it. We've mentioned vaping. And so the issue becomes then, you know, and I just, for the purpose, since it's a public forum here, is the imbibing of cannabis in any way have to be in that place or places, or can you take the cannabis at home? Can you go on the bus and take the edible en route? Or you don't have to be in a place or places if it's not actually smoked? Like what kind of guidance do we have about that as a municipality? You know, because obviously people are allowed to use it at home. We're not talking about that when we talk about a place that we're going to designate. But what kind of guidance do we have on that piece?
So
Can I answer that, Josh?
Yeah, yes, please do.
Dominique, I don't think we've had any guidance.
Yeah.
It's that, you know, simple or not so simple. You know, if I'm going to say something kind of silly, I hope you all get it. If I go through a red light and a cop doesn't see me, that I violate the law.
Yes.
You know? I mean, you know, think about it for a minute. Possessing marijuana right now in the state of Connecticut is not illegal. You can possess up to a certain amount. What I think this law is addressing is the physical, as you said, imbibing of it, whether that be from eating it or smoking it or vaping it. And I think that what the state legislature has said, look at, let's, you know, each municipality that wants to sell it, and we should be reminded of that. If you're not going to sell it, you do not have to designate a place where people can imbibe it. But because we're going to choose to sell it, I think, then we in the city of Norwalk have to pick a place. And there lies the rub. I mean, where do we pick? You know, do we find an island in the middle of the sound? Where do we go that's not going to be a political football? You know, and that's, you know, really going to be, you know, the issue that we're going to have to, well, you guys are going to have to deal with, is where is this going to be? And David makes great points. You know, should we designate several different places, or would that create more problems than it's worth? Or should there be, I think it should be a place, you ready, where no one's going to go. That's the way I look at it. Let's pick a place where we don't think people are going to go to imbibe cannabis. That they're going to say, I don't want to go there. And that they are going to choose to, you know, stay at home and do what they do. Because let's face it, gang, this is all brand new. It's legal, you know. It is now legal in the state of Connecticut to do this. And so we are, as David said, we're taxed with the responsibility of coming up with all the rules for it. You know, that's a tremendous challenge. You know, it's a great challenge. So personally, I don't think we should make it that complicated. I think we should make it pretty simple, that we should come up with the best place that we can think of, designate it. And I said this to Josh, so he knows I'm saying this. I think we should pick a space. We should say, this is the place. And, you know, say lovey.
Yeah, Tom is right about a lot of this. And I also think that just a little addendum, Dominique, you'll see that the word consumption is used many times throughout the ordinance. Consumption includes any and all. So that is everything from edibles to smoking. Consumption means consumption. And in fact, in 14C, it even says cannabis, the public consumption is permitted only through smoking, vaping, or the consumption of edibles. So, you know, just so that we're keeping an eye on what it is. But when we say you're not allowed to, you know, you're not allowed to consume cannabis on a sidewalk, that's consume in any form.
So people can't
vape. That's a vape pen as well as an
edible outside at a restaurant after dinner, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Now, look, I think there's, as Tom Keegan was pointing out, there's going to be an extent to which people just do this anyway, you know, and there is definitely an enforcement challenge here. There's no doubt about it. But there is also a prevailing public health issue, as Nora pointed out, about, you know, particularly exposure to children. And of course, really, you know, focusing on making sure that we protect kids from, you know, having it too early and not when they're of legal age to choose whether they can have it or not.
Right. Well, then.
I'm sorry, Dominic, go ahead.
Oh, just as a follow-up, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Tom. So I see that in 1.4, and it's very clear about you can't have it in outdoor dining. You know, you can't have it anywhere in land controlled by the city, including sidewalks, all that. Do you think it's worthwhile putting the definition of consumption up in our definition?
You know, it's so funny you were just saying that. I was just thinking about doing that.
Okay.
I think that honestly might be a worthwhile exercise when, of course, yeah. I'm going to make a note to do that.
Right, Nora.
Very briefly, just to sort of further out on this, I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that we do not permit people to walk around on sidewalks consuming alcohol, right? This is a prohibition on use in public space, which is something that we do with other substances as well. Now, again, I think it is very likely, to Josh's point, to Tom Keegan's point, that as this all evolves and we begin to license the retail sale of cannabis for consumption on site, that things like outdoor dining with cannabis allowed, like that may be a shift coming. But at the moment, we do not currently allow consumption at the retail sites. So I think that's a conversation for another day. And this ordinance does not prohibit the use of any of these things on private property, which again is consistent with our alcohol regulations. And again, in my humble opinion, should be how we treat smoking as well. I personally would be thrilled to have a ban on all smoking on public property. So, you know, I don't think that we are singling out cannabis here in a way that is inconsistent with how we treat other substances. Other than to the fact that we are too generous with tobacco permissions, in my opinion. So I really am very comfortable with designating the smallest possible piece of public sidewalk or public land. Like, I'm happy to give a square foot because the ordinance requires it. And otherwise say to people, do this in private. That is your private business. And we'll talk about, again, retail consumption coming, and then we might have some changes around, you know, how it can be used in bars, et cetera. But I don't know, from my perspective, this is not inconsistent with what we do with other things. And I don't think that there should be special exceptionalism for cannabis because somehow that substance is, you know, less of an adult only substance. I don't know. I am uncomfortable, or I fear going too far in the other direction. You know, this is not a public thing. And that I think is a fine line to draw, that we don't use intoxicating subjects on our substances on public land.
I also would note, just as a follow-up to what Nora said too, we have been working, and the city, particularly the planning and zoning department, the public health and the health department, have been incredibly helpful in finding available places that are owned and controlled by the city that don't interfere. Remember, last time we did the hearing, Steve Kleppen showed a map of the eligible retail sites combined with what we were calling sensitive sites. This includes schools, healthcare facilities, places where health services are rendered. In fact, I was looking at today, a list was sort of developed of eligible parcels that don't fall within those sensitive sites, that are owned or either owned and or controlled by the city, that could be eligible sites, plural, for the designated spot. Again, the reason why the designated spot language is the way it is right now is to afford us discretion should we need to be flexible, and that is, with that one exception, we are trying to otherwise regulate this similarly to how we regulate cigarettes. The one exception being this designated spot requirement, which is a unique thing and new.
David.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I take exception. We do allow within our laws and our codes people to purchase alcohol and consume it on site. So we give them a location to purchase the alcohol, not have to take it home, right there at the restaurant and the bar. We're not doing that with the cannabis retail establishment. So we have to be conscious of that, of allowing.
But that's not
that.
currently permitted under state law. I mean, that's the issue, right? That's a state law decision that will probably change at some point, is my understanding, Josh, correct? I mean,
It could change.
It has in other states. That's sort of been the follow on to other states. So
yeah, I mean,
it could change, but it's not right now, and that's my
that's correct.
That's what I'm saying on that. I want to jump shift. That you mentioned something, Josh, in your opening, that the ratio has changed or been eliminated to population size to retail establishments. What is that
correct.
new? How does that affect us within the city? Which leads to my next question of how can we, in our continued discussion of this, how can we begin to look at the cultivation, the micro cultivation side of this for the city? Because I think that's an opportunity for Norwalk, a huge opportunity.
Yes, agreed.
For Norwalk. And I'm wondering, how does that affect that side as well as the retail side?
I'm going to say that it doesn't. And I'm going to say they're two separate things. And I'll take them in turn. The first part is what happened in May. So at the time we were having our meeting, the state legislature was just finishing up its session and had just passed a bill that provided several amendments to SB 1201, which was the original bill that legalized cannabis in the state. Connecticut created a social equity council, so on and so forth. The amendment did a lot of things, including eliminate these like gifting parties. But one of the things that it did was it eliminated the original requirement that we were basing our some decisions off on SB 1201, that there would be one retail site, we're not talking about microcultivation, but one retail site per 25,000 residents. So we were saying publicly, because it was the law at the time, that we were going to have up to 3. The law as it currently stands does not provide a population-based limit, meaning there could technically be as many cannabis sites as the people who have licenses and apply and go through the zoning permit.
So as many as we choose to permit, we can permit. This is retail only, right?
That's retail.
Retail, okay.
So we, and I've spoken with council about this. I'm still kind of trying to basically figure out a decision on this, but I've seen nothing that would prohibit the city, whether by ordinance or frankly, in this situation, probably preferably by zoning reg amendment, to say there could be no more than 3, 4, 5, however many, of these establishments in the city of Norwalk. I don't think there's any law that disallows us from putting a cap if we so choose. And I think that whether we want to do that is something that is worthy of discussion. But that change, David, is that the state had imposed a population-based limitation. That limitation has now been eliminated.
Really?
Yeah, that was House Bill 53429. It's a little nerdy that I remember this, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But that's one
You
of
know,
the changes that came out
I
of the
have
bill.
another question that.
Wait, I'm
leads
sorry.
into-
Can I answer your other question first?
Yeah, the micro cultivator. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So microcultivate, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I know that Diana Revolus has spoken about this a couple times too. Microcultivation could be a potentially big industrial or what we would call light industrial, frankly, thing for the Norwalk economy. One of the things that makes it challenging is that I believe there's a minimum of 15,000 square feet that you have to have because there needs to be a sufficient grow space. There are several sites in Norwalk that could probably fit that bill. I'm sure there are people who are interested in doing that kind of business in Norwalk. That application, were to go through the zoning permitting process, would not be like retail. It would be like industrial. It'd be like if someone was building a plant, like a factory. In fact, Steve, when he was at the last meeting, talked about this. Yeah. So to me, I see this not carrying a lot of the same sort of restrictions. I would also note, I know someone asked this at the last meeting, I'll follow up on this. There was a question as to whether these microcultivation facilities can have retail elements. So like, for example, some wineries, which are considered industrial, have like tasting rooms. We have found nothing in the state law that permits this for cannabis, as in a microcultivator cannot have like a tasting room and provide retail sales at that site. So just want to make that clear.
Do you know what the public act was that was in May?
So SB 1201, which is the bill that was passed.
Right, that was
21. Last
year.
year.
That was
21.
Yeah.
That amended several parts of the public act. It's not one law. It's an amendment to several different laws.
Right. But the one that was passed in May?
So that's House Bill 5, I think it's 53429 or 54329. I forgot which one. I don't know what it's actually been coded in the general statutes. I believe it also did a similar thing where it amended several parts of the statute, including some parts that have been amended by SB 1201. I'd have to get back to you on that. That's a long way of saying. Happy to get back to you on that one.
Thanks.
Margaret Watt providing a real assist here. Public Act 22-103. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Margaret.
Margaret? Oh.
And hits us with the smiley face. Yeah. Tom Livingston, I think.
I was just David, you're I'm going back to your point about equity. And it's unfortunate we don't have Darlene or Diana here because they had comments about, having the retailers in, well, for lack of a better word, South Norwalk or District B. And I think it'd be really interesting to get their take on this, on your point, because I think it's a very valid point. I also do think that reality is that, there may be an initial surge at whatever place we have or places, but after that, it's going to be a non-issue. But anyway,
there's a big consensus around that, actually, that's very likely to happen.
So anyway, so where are we? So I think just in terms of next steps, I mean, I don't know if people want to talk about other provisions of this. So for example, the administration of the funds and the process, any comments on that in terms of the guidelines and all that? Okay, well, here's what I'm thinking, and David, I know you've spoken to Lisa about this too. I think we need to clean up some things in the definitions, such things as the amended
equity piece,
codes and equity and things like that. We need to look at to make the effectiveness of this consistent with the timing of that, tighten that up a little bit.
Yep.
I really want to look at section 12330 MM and how the collection and the movement of the funds based on the state statutes, how that works with ours, and just make sure that we're in line with the funding and the
You're talking in section 1.6, right, David?
Yeah, it's in, no, it's actually in 1.7, because you reference Connecticut General Statute. It's 12 dash
Yes,
330 MM, which
MM.
is a whole new
That's right.
subsection, which is the subsection dealing with the funding of cannabis. And I haven't had a chance to, I just started this afternoon looking at it, and I haven't had really a chance to look at it against what you got.
Yeah.
Right?
So the basic rub with that, this section is virtually unchanged, I think, from the last time we did this. In 1230 MM requires the municipality to designate certain officials to interact with the state.
Right.
And then unlike the way the mechanism works is the state gives us a report of how much the retailers owe the city of municipal sales tax. The city is then responsible for the invoicing and collection of those monies, which it says in the ordinance. So we basically had to follow the line of the law here and designate the applicable people to perform those functions. But if there are different questions you have, or if you think there's something we need to fix or tighten up, let me know.
No, I that's why I think that we're not moving this to public hearing tonight.
No,
correct?
no.
No. I said that right at the top.
Yeah, great. Yeah, because I think we just need another, few days to go through a couple things. I also, and you and I spoke about this briefly at one point, and I'm curious if there isn't, I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but it's the idea of designating percentages that go into different pots, and the different pots being or buckets based on the things that we can spend this money on. So there's educational opportunities that money can be spent. There's streetscape, and there's this. Do we look at it in a way that X amount of dollars is this, X amount of dollars is to addiction services, mental health services, those types of things. They're not dollars, but a percentage of that money, so that those buckets continue to fill, incrementally, as opposed
That's actually,
to one account.
I'll talk about that a little bit, because I was thinking about that too. It's an interesting question as to whether, how this should work. It's like, one possibility is the council each year picks a priority, and they pick that 50% of the funds go to X, but that's not in here now, but that's something that.
Well, do we create that mechanism that each year the council at a certain point in the year determines that thing for that year, and that becomes a in the part of the ordinance that's something that we do, or we establish what those buckets are initially and we fill them accordingly?
Well, the buckets are statutory buckets, right?
Right, but we don't designate. We show the buckets here in 1.6, but we don't really say, 25% goes here, 40% goes here, 10% goes here. We just talk about it in a very large general bucket right now, and I'm wondering if it would be better to put it in little cans. I don't know. I'm asking.
No, I think it's a fair question, because I was thinking the same thing. I mean, that's why it must be fair, right? No.
But you are the temporary chair tonight.
Yeah, I am. Like, anything I say is fair and right. I don't know what people think about that.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is, and I know Lisa, I'm not going to speak for Lisa, but I will say that Lisa has raised this point a number of times, which is that we want to afford ourselves discretion because priorities shift. So putting in the statute X percentage for this amount, if we wanted to change that, again, similar to what we were talking about before, it's a multi-month process.
I don't think that's what David's saying. I think I could be wrong. I thought the council could pick each year priorities, but I don't know.
Right, that was one option. He said there were two options he proposed.
I was building off of what Tom had said, which was just that idea that every year there's that if it's community services that presents possible initiatives, and the council then comes out of a committee, comes to the council, and it votes in that year, that's what the money, that's where or which buckets we fill with which amount during that year.
Yeah, I mean,
3% of the sales, when you look at what's going on in other states, could potentially be a substantial sum of money. And so that's why I think we want to make sure that we're, anyways.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point. And I think that if you have ideas about how you think the best way to allocate, allocate, or at least an allocation scheme, I'm all ears. And I think, I know that Tom, I know a number of us have discussed this. And I think if we need to provide some more clarity, I think, your counsel and help would be greatly appreciated.
Because when you look at the state statute, it just defines.
Yeah, no,
what
the
you
state
can and
statute's
can't
incredibly
do.
vague.
It's not that didactic, and I think we could be a little more. We could drill down a little more. So.
Yes, and part of the reason to create the cannabis account is to give us a solid foundation upon which we can do those things. I also think that Lamond and his guidelines are going to provide a little more clarity in the administration, at least in terms of the mechanics of how applications and stuff like that are received. But I think in terms of the oversight, in terms of what the council wants to see in terms of policy direction, I think that is a totally worthy discussion about how much of a sort of arm we should have on the tiller.
Dominique?
To this point, thanks, Tom. To this point, I'm thinking with my community services chair hat on, and I know that there are the broad categories in the statute, and that would guide us, if we wanted to put those broad categories in the ordinance. But I believe that this should be, something that the chief of community services, to your point, Josh, just now, would be providing the guidance on and ultimately the decision making, right? This is not a council decision, just to be clear, as to we're not going to decide every year where the money goes. Am I correct?
Well, I think
so. Oh, Tom, go for it.
I was just saying the way I envisioned it, a possible way of doing this would be the council would say 50% should go to pick one of the categories. They're not picking recipients. That would still go to Lamont.
Respectfully, I think that should be the chief of community services.
Yeah, definitely. But the question is should we have that additional step in there?
Well, okay. Yeah, I'm reacting to that because I think that I don't want, our subject matter experts who work in the city government, I don't want us to be starting to mix in a way that takes away from their scope of work, their agency, their expertise, because we're not, who knows who's going to be on the council in 5, 10, 15 years. We could have folks who really know about this, but we could also have folks that, maybe we should defer to subject matter experts, right?
Well, just let David will speak in a second.
Yeah,
but it wasn't to designate who the recipients are, who the grantor is. It's just, this is the category. David, go ahead.
I would do it as from what Dominique, what you're saying, I agree with. I think that the recommendation of if this is going to come through the chief of community services, and at whatever the designation of that meeting is, he recommends this year when we receive the money, we should look at these initiatives that fall in this bucket. So I recommend 50% goes here, 25% goes here and there. And because we're talking about this money that we receive from the state. Well, now I guess the way it's set up is we actually collect the tax now, don't we, Josh?
Yeah, we are the ones, the city is responsible for the collection of the tax.
But as we look at how we allocate it each year, from that, as far as 50% to this, 75% to whatever it is.
So Dominic,
maybe it's too much. I don't know. But Dominic, you make a fair point.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. But let me just give an example. So say we were doing this for 10 years and they've never put any money into, let me just read a category, into, streetscape development improvements. And they've never done it. But we as a council would have no say over that. As opposed to, you could say in the beginning of each year, you have 10% go to streetscape. I don't know. You're not naming who should get it. You're just naming the categories, prioritizing a little bit. But I just throw it out there. I'm not saying what should be right. Nora?
I mean, just to sort of piggyback on some of Dominique's, I feel like that's the whole point of having the plan come to the council, is precisely so the council can give its input. If it feels, for instance, that the community service department has consistently been missing an agenda, I don't see any reason to sort of, on the flip side, I don't see any reason to sort of tie hands when there is a requirement that the council review it, and presumably the council would be happy to give input into it. I don't know. I'm not, I feel like this is maybe a little bit of a problem in search of a solution. If we feel like they're not doing what we want to do, then the community services department can ask for it sooner than 24 months also. Right. I mean, the 20
we can seek it
is a minimum. So.
Right. This says
Yeah,
the guidelines are approved. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. More work to come.
Yes.
So,
All right.
listen, I think this has been incredibly productive, and I really, really appreciate, your engagement and, and your thoughts. I've been taking notes, and I will, get back in touch and show you additional drafts. And this is a collaborative process, and this is the reason we do this is to make sure we get it right, and that's what we're going to do here. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for all your work. Okay, if there's no further discussion on that, we'll go to new business, which is discuss and vote on Chapter 17 Aquifer Protection Agency, Section 1, Designation, Membership, and Technical Training. And we have before us a proposed amendments to Section 17-1, which essentially change references to Zoning Commission to the Planning and Zoning Commission to conform to the changes made to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is there any discussion on this? Okay. Josh.
As someone who actually used to sit on this commission as a member of the Zoning Commission, this is not anything that's by any means revolutionary. In fact, the Zoning Commission had sat in this capacity as aquifer protection for quite some time. It's a meeting that happened, I swear, maybe 3 times a year. It's important, but I don't think this is anything but a technical change.
Yeah,
so just providing my perspective here as someone who just has done this before.
Thank you. I view it the same way. So if there are no comments, I'm going to ask if Mr. Keegan has a motion to move this.
Wait,
Mr.
Dominique.
No, did you want to make a comment, Dominique?
Question actually for clarification, just since this seemingly would be a technical change, just for transparency's sake, have we heard from any members of any other commissions in Norwalk as to why this would be not a technical change, like it should be their domain? I presume not.
No,
because it was suggested in public comment that there would be another commission that's better suited, but if we haven't heard from the actual commission as such.
No, we've heard from nobody else.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
So I'll ask if Mr. Keegan has a motion to make. Mr. Keegan, would you like to move this public hearing? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? So it is unanimous. Thank you. And I think that is it for the evening, unless somebody else has anything else they want to raise. We could talk about Lisa, she's not here, but that would be mean.
That'd be mean.
Yeah. All right. Well, I too will thank Mr. Keegan. I enjoyed working with you on this committee. We'll miss you, definitely, but we know.
Well, Mr. Keegan.
We have your cell phone number. We can always call you in Florida. All right.
You can. I promise I'll answer.
I think Keegan's got one last motion to make.
I think he does.
It's going to be,
I'd like to
he's
make
gonna-
a motion to adjourn my last ordinance committee meeting.
All in favor?
So sad.
When we don't take it, what if we don't?
But if we don't adjourn, Tom, can you still go to Florida? I don't know.
I don't know.
I'll have to sit here all night. That's it.
All right, all in favor?
I know you're gonna when you're on the road, you're gonna block all the numbers, right?
I know, I will.
All right.